This is probably the creepiest moment I've ever experienced. We were on a road trip, and the end goal was to end up in the Canadian Rockies. We started out west, planning to get to a certain northern state, then head north and cross the border. We had done lots of camping in other western states, and were used to stopping in small, rural, cowboy towns, as we like to call them. But nothing quite prepared us for our stop in this one particular state. We assumed it would be like the others, a few big cities, but mostly small, rural ones, and lots of empty land in between. We often stopped in smaller towns since they usually had cheap campgrounds where we could stay for the night. It was getting to be about time to stop, and we found a small town a bit west of a major city. I can't remember the name of it now because we didn't end up staying long, but the population sign said about 200, and we saw a campground, a hotel, one gas station, and one restaurant. We pulled up to the gas station, and while we were filling up, we didn't see a single person on the street or anywhere, and it was early evening, about 5. We were just standing around looking at the old buildings when we suddenly saw movement in a window. The blinds were down but open, and we saw what looked like a child in the corner, but he was bald. He quickly moved away when he saw we'd noticed him. It was creepy as hell, like something out of a horror movie. We finished filling up, got back in the car, and stopped about 2 blocks away at the only restaurant in town. It was a dinky little place with 2 cars in the parking lot and the open sign on, so we figured we had to eat. As we approached, we could hear lots of people talking and laughing inside. It seemed like a nice place. What happened next was both the most confusing and disturbing thing I've ever been a part of. It was like I had walked into some B-horror movie. As soon as we opened the door and stepped in, everyone in the whole place instantly stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at us. The place was packed. There had to be 50+ people in there. We just stood in the doorway in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. All of a sudden, a very old lady in the booth right in front of us slowly turned her head, wearing 2 eye patches, and said in a creepy, raspy voice, "What do you want here?" All of us immediately turned around and literally ran back to the car, got in, and got back on the road. We didn't know what the hell had just happened. I feel like if we had stayed, we would have been murdered. We didn't stop driving until we were out of that state and into another country, where all we saw was bears and mountains for days. It was a great trip, but that was a fucking scary moment that I still can't wrap my head around.
This happened some years back. My boyfriend and I were driving from a major city to the small town where his parents lived. We'd been cruising through cornfields for hours on end when suddenly the fields just stopped. It was like coming out of a forest into an open plain, but instead of green, all we could see for miles was ash and charcoal. There had obviously been a massive fire.
Subscribe.
As we drove, I saw a man and a little boy walking hand in hand through one of the burned-out fields. It looked like a wholesome, idyllic scene, an old-timer taking his grandson out for a walk. I watched them from a distance as they headed toward what looked like an old well. As we got closer, I could see them in almost perfect detail. The old man in his dungarees, the little boy's blue shirt, and his almost white blonde curly hair. Then, as we drove right past them, I saw it, clear as day. The old man picked up the little boy and tossed him down the well. I screamed. As my boyfriend was panicking, asking what was wrong, I was frantically searching for my cell phone. A terrifying image of us lying dead in that field flashed through my head, so I just told him to keep driving and that a kid had just been thrown down a well. He'd been zoned out, focused on the road, and hadn't seen a thing. When I finally found my phone, I had 0 bars. I grabbed our map and saw there was a small town just a few miles down the road. I told him to floor it. We pulled into the parking lot of a little diner at the side of the highway, and I ran inside asking to use their phone to call 911. As I described what I'd seen to the dispatcher, everyone in the diner went quiet, listening. They gasped when I said I saw a kid get thrown down a well. The dispatcher told me to wait there for a deputy. When I hung up, every single person in the diner was staring at me. A man got up from his table and started asking about the burned-out fields. When I described them, he turned to another diner and asked if they belonged to a specific farmer. Then he asked me to describe the man I'd seen. Everyone seemed to agree it was this farmer and that his grandkids were staying with him that week. They were all shocked and confused. They obviously knew this guy and couldn't believe he'd do something so terrible. When the deputy showed up, I had to repeat the whole story, and I got the same "Are you sure?" reaction, as if what I'd said was impossible. Right then, another patrol car pulled up and the county sheriff got out. He too did the whole, "Huh, really?" thing, and then walked off to talk on his radio. He came back and told us that someone at headquarters had called the farmer, who said that while he did have his grandson staying with him, they hadn't been anywhere near the burned-out fields. I was practically begging the sheriff to drive back down the highway so I could show him the exact well. He said he couldn't just walk onto somebody's land without a warrant. The more I tried to convey the urgency, the more he and his deputy started to look at me like I was crazy. I had to literally beg him before he finally told his deputy to drive out to the well and check it out. While we waited, my boyfriend tried to reassure me. The sheriff sat in his car talking on his radio, then suddenly walked over saying he had good news. Firstly, the well was empty. Secondly, the farmer was on his way to the diner with his grandson, so I could see for myself that everything was fine.
Subscribe.
I was speechless. I was certain of what I'd seen. The sheriff suggested I must have been mistaken, that maybe what I saw was an optical illusion from the speed and smoke. I asked how the deputy could be so sure the well was empty. Was he sure there wasn't a kid down there, maybe underwater? I knew what I saw. As I was trying to stay calm, the deputy returned, followed by a beat-up old truck. A big guy in dungarees got out and said, "Now who's this saying I done dropped my damn grandson down a well?" He then walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and helped a young boy out, leading him over to us. My boyfriend whispered, "See, I told you everything would be fine." But it wasn't. The kid I had seen had blonde curly hair. The kid in front of us had dark, closely cut hair. I started getting more and more frantic as I explained it wasn't the same kid. The deputy tried to tell me maybe the sun had just made his hair look blonde. While I was arguing with the deputy, the sheriff asked to speak to my boyfriend in private. A few minutes later, my boyfriend came back and said we needed to leave. The sheriff had basically asked if I was crazy and told him to get me out of town before I was arrested for public disturbance. I had this horrible, creeping feeling that something dark was going on in that town. We faked an apology to the farmer and his grandson, and the second we were back on the road and I had reception, I called the state patrol to report the whole thing. They got back to me a few days later, saying there was nothing to it. I know what I saw. I'd never had any kind of hallucination before or since. I'm not crazy.
Subscribe.
I went to high school in this really small town. I was in the marching band, and I was the section leader for the percussion section. We had a pretty good group of kids, but there was this one girl who seemed to have a lot of social and/or mental problems, but not enough to consider her unable to be a part of the band. She couldn't read music or anything, but I tried to be nice to her when I could to make her feel like part of the group. One day, it was raining, and I was going out to my car. She usually walked home, and I saw her standing out by the door. I asked her if she had a ride, and she said no, so of course I offered to take her since she lived just down the street. She told me where to go, and we came up on this area with some smaller old houses. I thought, okay, I know people who live out here. This makes sense. She instructed me to turn into what looked like a driveway up the street,
So I did, only to find that the path went sort of behind the two houses on either side of it. I drove down it, eventually coming up on this sort of clearing the size of maybe 1.5 house lots. It was completely submerged by forest, and I couldn't see it from the road. The driveway stopped just as a dead end in the grass, revealing 4 tiny houses squished into the clearing, each with no driveway. Each house was the size of maybe an apartment and didn't have house numbers and looked all around sketchy. The girl got out and I said goodbye. I figured I better hightail it out of there because this place was a bit creepy, so I turned around in my seat and began to back up as there was no way to turn around. I looked back for just a second in front of me to suddenly see the girl chasing a dog around her yard. I guess she went to get it out of its cage, which was some wired fence just hooked into a loop and filled with chickens, and it got loose. I sighed and got out to help her get the dog. Eventually, she tackled it, and I asked if she was okay. She said yes, and I was in my car and out of that place faster than any country time metaphor. I'm still pretty sure the city doesn't know these houses are there. Then again, even if they did, I doubt they'd do anything since they've yet to even make sure we have a grocery store. The closest we have is a dollar store.
I grew up in a place that was just cornfields for miles. Halloween has always been my favorite holiday, but unlike kids in the city who had actual neighborhoods, we had to walk 1.5 miles just to get to the next house. The last year we were allowed to go trick-or-treating, our immediate neighbor to the east, who lived 3 miles away, told us to get the hell away because we were getting too big for kids' games. For the entire next year, my brother and I would scowl whenever my dad drove past his house. He had ruined Halloween. Kids are cruel and stubborn, and I guess we were just that kind of kid.
Subscribe.
The following year, my mom took us to this interactive outdoor museum that teaches people about rural life. Honestly, we were not thrilled, but one little educational tidbit got our attention. The guide told us how our ancestors used Halloween as a night to play pranks on each other, the most common of which was taking a neighbor's gate off its hinges and leaving it in someone else's yard. I remember my brother and I just looking at each other with this wordless communication like, oh, the neighbor's gonna get it this year. And so that's what we did. We snuck out, took his front gate off its hinges, and left it 1 mile down the road in another neighbor's yard. We did stuff like that for the next couple of years, each time getting bolder until we struggled to top the previous year's prank. One year, we stole a considerable section of his white picket fence and just threw it into the cornfield across the highway. My one and only rule for these pranks was to never get caught and never see his reaction. Imagining it was enough. This one year, we walked up to his house in the middle of the night and saw something we'd never seen before. He had put up a Halloween decoration, a Grim Reaper on his front porch. It wasn't some dumb scarecrow either. It looked like he'd gotten a real mannequin and dressed it in a spooky black robe complete with an old rusty scythe. It was kind of intimidating, but we weren't about to be deterred. Right as we started to silently dismantle his fence, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, or rather the lack of something. The Grim Reaper was gone. I whispered to my brother, "The Reaper's gone. Did you see it move?" He looked at me like I was crazy, but then he started getting freaked out too. We were just crouched there, tools in hand, when my brother whispered, "Let's get out of here." We immediately got up and started jogging back toward the highway. Then, out of nowhere, the Grim Reaper was standing in front of us, blocking our escape. It hadn't been a mannequin. It was him. He dressed up and just stood there, still as a statue, waiting. There was a long moment when we locked eyes with him. He'd taken down the hood, and then we just bolted. We had to run back through his property, climbing a fence and into a cornfield to get away. He was fast for an older guy, not weighed down at all by the scythe and robes. As I jumped down from the fence, I landed wrong and badly sprained my ankle. That's when I got terrified. My brother kept running and I wanted to shout for him, but I knew it would give away my position, so I just hid in the cornfield, so scared I was covering my mouth to keep from breathing too heavily, while the furious, scythe-armed man stalked up and down the road looking for me. I had to limp from one hiding spot to another, trying my best not to rustle the corn stalks. It was completely terrifying, hearing him say things like, "I'm gonna cut you up into little pieces and feed you to my pigs." The tone in his voice told me he meant every word. He eventually gave up and went back to his house. Needless to say, we never tried any more pranks on that guy after that. This is something that has been bothering me for a couple of years now, and I'm honestly not sure if it was a genuinely creepy experience or just something I overthought. My wife thinks it's creepy too.
Subscribe.
My family has been in the restaurant business for as long as anyone can remember. My father brought his expertise with him when he came to this country and did very well for himself. When he passed, ownership fell to me. As much as it was an honor, the restaurant scene had become increasingly competitive, and it got to the point where I wasn't making enough to comfortably put both my kids through college. So, I started scouting out relocation options in smaller towns. I don't want to name the town where this happened. I won't dox some innocent gas station owner over a misunderstanding. What I will say is that it's in the Midwest and is close to a decent college, which was a big draw. At first, it looked like a totally regular place. Schools, a hospital, nice houses. But the more I drove around, the more the place started to seem dead. I visited on a Saturday afternoon, a time when the main high street should have been teeming with people, but it was deserted. I swear I counted all the foot traffic on one hand. It was a wonder the stores weren't all boarded up. I ended up asking an older lady what the deal was, but when I approached her on the main street, she completely ignored me. It was like I was a ghost. She didn't even flinch as she walked right past me. It was so jarring I actually chuckled. I approached someone else, and while he did talk to me, he was far from friendly, more passive-aggressive. I asked him where everyone was, and he just shrugged and said something like, "It's a quiet town. We like it that way," before walking off. These were obviously not good indicators, and I'd pretty much decided this wasn't the place. On my way out of town, I saw my car's fuel gauge was low, so I pulled into a gas station on the edge of town. That's where things got really weird. I started filling up from these old-looking pumps, and my eyes almost fell out of my head when I saw the price meter crawling up shockingly slow. The gas was extremely cheap. This put me in a pretty good mood as I walked inside to pay. The attendant was an older man watching a little box TV, and he was the first friendly person I'd met all day. He was warm and welcoming, and he smiled when I told him how much I appreciated his gas prices. As I paid, he asked what I was doing in town. The second I mentioned the possibility of moving there to open a restaurant, the guy's face changed. It wasn't a rude expression, it was almost fearful. He looked me dead in the eyes and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Don't move here." I was so taken by surprise that I found myself responding with, "Huh? What did you say?" At that moment, a woman, who I assume was his wife, emerged from the back rooms. I don't know if she heard what he'd said, but she seemed to know something was off. After addressing her husband, he just totally shut down. He shot her a look with that same spooked expression and then started busying himself like a child caught doing something wrong. I was so taken aback, I just stood there, dumbfounded, until his wife asked if there was anything else she could help me with. When I said no, she replied, "Then I think you'd better leave," before disappearing into the back again. Her husband flatly refused to make eye contact with me. I just walked out, got back in my car, and started the drive home. And this is where I started to overthink it. If it was just a town full of rude people who didn't want some city guy moving in, I could understand. I'd even appreciate the honesty. But the gas station guy, that wasn't small-town xenophobia in his voice. It was fear, clear and unmistakable. The way he reacted when his wife appeared, it was like he'd been caught giving away some dirty secret. My wife figured everyone was just being rude. But after hearing it all like this, she admits she'd have been just as freaked out as I was. All we can do now is wonder what in God's name was going on in that town. The attendant didn't seem unfriendly. He seemed like he was trying to warn me, and I'd like to think I'm smart enough to act on that.